were blaming the Americans, Israel, Britain, France, etc. for this, and so they should, because the leadership in these countries has not reacted, has not been doing what they ought to be doing, which is calling out Israel.
The very nature of being a journalist in Gaza means that you are always at risk.
Britain and the European countries should be sending an aid flotilla now, or many aid flotillas, and so forth, instead of which they're continuing to supply arms, and they're not reacting to these. I mean, it's very hard not to break down in tears when you see some of these images. And my colleagues at Middle East Eye, they're seeing them every morning, and they're seeing many which don't get published, and the same applies to others. It's so shattering and awful. And no reaction, no real reaction, nothing substantial from the leadership of the Western world.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm your host Mas Patel, and this is Analysis. Israel's war on Gaza has become not only the deadliest conflict for civilians in recent memory, but also the deadliest for journalists. Reporters and media workers have been systematically killed alongside the civilians they live amongst and report on. This week, Middle East Eye is mourning its correspondent, Ahmed Abu Aziz, aged just 28 and killed in an Israeli airstrike on Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. The attack, carried out in 2 waves, killed at least 20 people, including 5 Palestinian journalists working for Reuters, the Associated Press, Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye, as well as rescuers at the scene. Let's look at this report from Zachary Goldman, who explains more.
An Israeli strike on Nasser Hospital in Gaza drew a rush of journalists and first responders sifting through the wreckage for survivors and the remains of those killed. Among the dead, cameraman Hussam al-Masri, a contractor who worked for Reuters. He was up on an external stairwell, providing this live feed showing smoke rising from fighting elsewhere when the strike hit. A responder holds up a camera and a live view broadcast unit used to transmit live video, while others gather up a body. The man in the red t-shirt is photographer Hatem Khaled, another Reuters contractor who can be seen filming the recovery. Then, a second Israeli strike hits the hospital. Khaled, the photographer, was injured. Here is video footage from his camera just before the second blast. Palestinian health officials said at least 15 people, including 4 journalists, were killed in the strikes. In a statement, a Reuters spokesperson said, quote, "We are devastated to learn of the death of Reuters contractor Hussam al-Masri and injuries to another of our contractors, Hatem Khaled, in Israeli strikes on the Nasser Hospital in Gaza today." Adding, quote, "We are urgently seeking more information and have asked authorities in Gaza and Israel to help us get urgent medical assistance for Hatem." Health officials in Gaza named the 3 other journalists as Mariam Abu Daga, a freelancer who worked for the Associated Press, Mohammed Salama, who worked for Qatar-based Al Jazeera, and Muaz Abu Taha. Health officials added a rescue worker was also among those killed. The Israeli military confirmed it carried out a strike on Nasser Hospital. In a statement, it said it, quote, "regrets any harm to uninvolved individuals and does not target journalists as such." The Palestinian Journalists Syndicate condemned Israel for the strikes, saying it represented, quote, "an open war against free media with the aim of terrorizing journalists and preventing them from fulfilling their professional duty of exposing its crimes to the world."
This was the latest double-tap strike where a site is bombed and then hit again as people rush to help. Press freedom groups say this shows a pattern of deliberate targeting. The United Nations, meanwhile, has condemned the killings, reminding Israel that under international law, journalists and medics are civilians and targeting them is a war crime. As of the 25th of August, the Committee to Protect Journalists has confirmed 197 media workers have been killed, nearly all of them Palestinian. All of Al Jazeera's journalists working in Gaza have now been killed. making Gaza the deadliest conflict for the press ever recorded. Tonight we're joined by Peter Oborne, one of Britain's most respected political writers, a former chief political columnist at the Daily Telegraph and the British Press Awards columnist of the year. He's also the author of The Fate of Abraham, Why the West is Wrong About Islam. And joining him is Daniel Hilton, the Middle East Eye's head of news, whose frontline reporting on atrocities in Libya won an international media award and who has built a distinguished career covering the region from Beirut to Gaza. Welcome to you both. Daniel, let's start off with yourself. As somebody who heads the Middle East Eye or is one of the leaders there, how do you feel about this loss, of one of your journalists who was on the ground in Gaza?
I mean, it's impossible to describe. First of all, I'd like to say that Mohammed Salama, as well as Ahmed Aziz, contributed to Middle East Eye, and we consider them both very dear colleagues. We worked with them intimately for 2 years throughout this genocide, speaking to them every single morning. Getting to know them and getting to know their dreams, because these were two young men. One was engaged, one was recently married. Neither yet had the chance to have children, and their lives are cut short because they refused to not tell the truth. They refused to not run into danger, and it's a devastating loss for us at Middle East Eye.
Peter, under international law, journalists and medics are civilians. They must not be targeted. And given the AOAV civilian toll and now the CPJ's record number of journalist deaths, do you believe this amounts to war crimes and not just a strategy whereby, sadly, journalists are being caught up in this war?
Well, there's far too much evidence that journalists have been targeted. Israel has the habit of naming in advance those who they're going to go after. There's no doubt about it at all. This double tap strike is particularly obnoxious. It's what, of course, the US British-backed Saudis did in Yemen against civilians and against hospitals, and we're now finding it going on in Gaza as well.
Daniel, back to you. In terms of reporting on the ground in Gaza, we know international journalists are not allowed into the Strip by the Israelis, despite numerous calls for journalists to be given access. And then you have Palestinian journalists who are risking their life and limb to bring the news out of the Gaza Strip. Are there any precautions that you as an organisation are asking your journalists to undertake when they are reporting from what appears to be one of the most dangerous places in modern warfare, certainly in this century, if not even longer?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that my Palestinian colleagues in Gaza are some of the very most professional journalists I've ever worked with. They are head and shoulders above countless people that I can think of in the West or anywhere else in the world, and their professional nature is beyond doubt. Having said that, they do not take unnecessary risks. Mm-hmm. They do not put themselves in danger. Both Ahmed and Mohammed would tell us that it was their duty to try to stay alive because they needed to continue telling the truth and continue to report on what was happening in Gaza. But the very nature of being a journalist in Gaza means that you are always at risk. Even like in the very beginning of the war, in October 2023, some of my colleagues were finding it difficult to find places where they could sleep at night because they were being constantly displaced by Israeli attacks and expulsion orders. And even then, people all across Gaza knew that journalists had a target on their back, and that they were possibly risking their own lives if they rented a room or allowed a journalist to sleep on their floor, to bring, to bring their families into shelter. So there is, there is so much that there is only so much that Palestinian journalists and we as news organizations can do to protect journalists on the ground when Israel is so blatantly targeting them, and as Peter mentioned, often names the targets that names the journalists that they want to target before killing them in the first place.
Peter, the Israelis say that they do not intentionally target journalists. The facts bear out quite differently. What's your reaction to the statements that their media sort of personalities regularly come and parrot, saying that we are the most moral army, we take incredible precautions to make sure civilians' harm is not committed in any of our sort of campaigns. What's your reaction to their response to what's happened here? In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu himself tweeted saying that this was a misstep or words to that effect.
Benjamin Netanyahu said it was a terrible mishap, like
yes.
It was a mistake. I mean, a double-targeted strike. Look, the Israelis, the IDF has a long and gruesome record of lying, not just about journalists, about all kinds of things. I mean, you will all recollect the killing of the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh of Al Jazeera, where she was targeted and shot dead in cold blood, actually, and the Israelis claimed this was crossfire, it wasn't them, and eventually even they had to admit that it might have been them. So we have this long, and the trouble about it is that you cannot now believe a word the Israelis say on these matters. They say they don't kill civilians, they don't target hospitals. These are all statements which have been made during the conflict by Israeli spokesmen and have again and again proved tragically wrong.
But Peter, can I just say to you, in terms of the reaction to this particular bombing yesterday, there have been widespread condemnation from, for example, the foreign minister of this country, along with others. Donald Trump was asked yesterday this morning by an American journalist, and he denied even having knowledge about this, and then went on to talk about the hostages. Do you think the response of let's focus on European nations is adequate when they talk about investigations or when they talk about there must be a ceasefire? Or do you believe the response would have been different? Let's say, for example, a Western Sky News journalist had been killed, or perhaps a BBC journalist. God forbid that ever happens, though.
Look, 200 plus journalists have been killed in Gaza. Normally it passes without comment, or even by the Western media, or even they kind of justify it. They say that Israelis targeted as Hamas terrorist or something like that. Normally it's got to be remembered that the mainstream British media and international media are complicit in this. If this was going on in Ukraine, just imagine if the Russians had been killed 200 plus. And by the way, proportionately, it would have been far more in Ukraine, much bigger country. Thousands of journalists have been slaughtered. The uproar. There've been complete boycotting of Russian press conferences. International leaders would have gone crazy. But because it's Palestinian journalists in Gaza, it's been mute, and it's a little bit shaming. I mean, it's just not to my Daniel Hilton there of Middle East Eye, but of many of our colleagues, that they've only started to make a noise. You'll see that there are journalists who are killed, very brave and wonderful people, by the way, working for Western outlets like Reuters, and that's made this a story. But it wouldn't normally, if there hadn't been journalists working for Western outlets, this wouldn't have made much of a story at all.
Daniel, do you feel that with the deaths of so many Palestinian journalists working for, as Peter said, Western outlets, do you feel that there's complete impunity for the Israelis to do whatever they want, kill however many people and whatever professions they are in, surgeons, medical workers, journalists in this instance, and civilians? Obviously, we know the numbers are just absolutely horrific. Do you believe that the Israelis are completely able to do and act as they please and there is no comeback? And if that is the case, and you do believe that to be the case, what's the position of your organisation? Will you still continue to try and get the facts and report what's going on in Gaza?
Well, I think the evidence speaks for itself that we're 22 months into a war that many experts and rights groups and increasingly governments declare as a genocide according to the legal definition, and that is what Middle East Eye is now calling the war on Gaza. What I will say about the kind of sort of sense of impunity is that I think there are two things that make this incident interesting or different from other killings or killings of journalists. One is that so many of them were working for Western news organizations. Another is that the incident itself was captured on live television. And so it was very difficult for Israel to deny that it intentionally targeted this group of journalists and rescue workers. Interestingly, if you look at the Hebrew media today, there's a very different picture from the picture that's coming out in that the Israeli officials like Benjamin Netanyahu are delivering in English language. Netanyahu says that it's a tragic mishap, whilst Channel 14, which is a sort of right-wing news organization that's known to be supportive of the government and its war on Gaza, has reported that the soldiers involved are furious about that characterization of the incident by Netanyahu. They say that the attack was signed off by very senior members of the military leadership, and that they had been told that there was a Hamas center in the hospital, and that was what they were targeting. I mean, obviously, providing no evidence, and this is a sort of fabrication that is often repeated by the Israeli authorities to justify attacks on hospitals, which almost all of them have been completely shut down in Gaza because of Israeli assaults. Now, obviously, it is the duty of media organizations like Middle East Eye and everywhere to continue to back Palestinian journalists, to continue the brave work that they're doing so that the world can continue to see the atrocities that are committed there on a daily basis.
Peter, the scale of Israel's assault and the sheer, as I said before, the impunity within which they operate in Gaza has been shown to the world by these brave Palestinian journalists. Do you believe it's had an impact on policy making in the West? Because we know you can have all the demonstrations and all the noise around what's going on, but without policymakers actually feeling that there's pressure on them, nothing's going to change. Do you believe that they have made a difference?
Certainly think they've made a difference, a massive difference, because they have shown to the world what is being done by Israel in Gaza. And they've shown the slaughter of ordinary people, the destruction of its infrastructure, the creation of a hellscape, the move towards ethnic cleansing, and all of this. And people, and it is worth bearing in mind, actually, that many of the worst images, the most disgusting images of mass deaths, of children smashed to pieces, are withheld because they're just so atrocious. But people have seen them. But what you are right to ask about policymakers, because you're drawing attention here to this strange and mysterious divide between the reaction of anybody who's got half an ounce of humanity in them and the reaction of Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu or Keir Starmer in Britain or Macron, etc. There's been no reaction. I mean, we in Britain continue to supply arms to Israel. And by the way, it's very interesting. There's a statement by the media group in Gaza yesterday It was saying we're blaming the Americans, Israel, Britain, France, etc., for this, and so they should, because the leadership in these countries has not reacted, has not been doing what they ought to be doing, which is calling out Israel, inflicting sanctions. I'm beginning to think we probably need a no-fly zone, just as they had in Iraq to protect the Kurds. And clearly Britain and the European countries should be sending an aid flotilla now, or many aid flotillas, and so forth, instead of which they're continuing to supply arms, and they're not reacting to these. It's very hard not to break down in tears when you see some of these images. And the colleagues at Middle East Eye, they're seeing them every morning, and they're seeing many which don't get published, and the same applies to others. It's so shattering and awful. And no reaction, no real reaction, nothing substantial from the leadership of the Western world.
Daniel, just on that last point then from Peter, the lack of reaction, how does that make you and your organisation feel, somebody that's chartered to deliver the truth and to give us news so that we're better informed and we can make our own minds up. How does that feel when there isn't a strong reaction, there isn't talk of sanctions, there isn't talk of, completely isolating Israel, even in the footballing world, UEFA has still not thrown out the Israeli football team, out of their sporting competitions, despite saying that, the killing of children should stop. Give us a sense from your perspective.
I think cynically we've, as journalists, have long got used to Western leaders failing to live by the standards that they profess to set, and that the sort of occasional statements of condemnation and support are sort of come out like clockwork without any real teeth behind them. What I will say about the work that we do and what we've noticed is that places like Middle East Eye are able to deliver information to the public who are able to make up their own mind. We've seen from protest movements across Britain and across the world that the public is increasingly informed, they're increasingly angry, and at some point there may be a kind of political reckoning where the leaders who have long allowed Israel to commit countless atrocities in Gaza will find themselves punished by the public, who are getting increasingly angry and desperate about the scenes that they're seeing on their televisions and on their mobile phones.
Peter, that's a very good point that Daniel makes. It's very clear that even across the pond in America, very, very prominent right-wing commentators, Tucker Carlson and a whole host of others have literally said, that's it, we cannot keep backing this, and they've turned against Israel, if you will. And certainly the case in this country, we've been much more critical of Israel than our American cousins. Do you believe then, going back to my point about policymakers, that inevitably there will be a reckoning? And in all your experience, you are a distinguished journalist. You've been in and around the political scene for as many years as I've been alive, I suppose. In your experience, do you believe that something will give and Israel will have to pay for the crimes that it's committing, or will the guilt of the European countries about the Holocaust give Israel yet another pass?
Well, you remind me of a quote in Macbeth. We're gone in blood. Macbeth says it after the murder of Duncan in Shakespeare's great play. We are so deep in blood that it's worse to go back than go on. And you have to sometimes ask whether that is the situation here, that the British, the Western world's media, the Western world's governments, the senior figures, have bought so deeply into these what Israel has done over the last 22 months. And by the way, it's done now. It's happened. It may get worse, but it's happened. It's to call for it to end now. Is very, very hard for them to do, because it means admitting you were wrong, and in this case, terribly wrong. It is the darkest thing in the lives of the policymakers. They will look back and with utter horror, and history will find it hard to believe the reaction. But whether they will, it's very hard for them now to go back on it.
Well, thank you, Peter, for that. Daniel, just a final word from you. Obviously, our condolences from Islam Channel to all of our colleagues, and certainly your colleagues that have lost their lives. Are you more determined than ever to ensure that the truth comes out of places like Gaza, I suppose Ukraine and other conflict zones across the world?
We have always taken inspiration from our colleagues in Gaza who, despite living through the war, through the onslaught, report through hunger, through chronic pain, and, any time when we in London or elsewhere in the Middle East or Europe feel like it's just too much to go on, we think about our colleagues there, people like Ahmed, people like Mohammed, who refuse to give up themselves. And they also said that they reported in Gaza, they kept going because they owed it to the memory of their colleagues who were killed and friends who were killed by Israel previously. So we will just continue to honour that sentiment.
Can I suggest one thing? Those watching this should read Daniel Hilton's profile, immensely moving profile of Ahmed Abu Aziz. It's just telling the story of the struggles he went through. Towards the end, he could hardly get any food. He was going days without food, and it's a beautifully written, very moving tribute to an immensely brave and courageous man who's been taken away from us, along with so many others.
Well, thank you so much for that, Peter. We appreciate you letting us know. And also my thanks to you, Daniel, on what must be a very, very difficult time for Middle East Eye. Our best wishes are with you and your organisation. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. We've heard tonight about the scale of the civilian toll in Gaza and the unprecedented targeting of journalists who risk everything to bring us the truth. The questions of justice and accountability remain urgent, not only for Gaza, but the future for journalism everywhere. I've been your host, Maz Patel, and from all of us here, thank you for watching and good night.